The moment Eleanor laughed, the entire world outside the small bistro table dissolved, leaving only the sickening realization. I recognized the sound before I recognized the curve of her smile. That warm, husky sound had echoed faintly from the edges of my childhood. My friend, Liam, had set me up on this blind date, describing her simply as successful, charming, and exactly your type. She was all those things, but she was also the woman who drank wine with my single father, Robert, on Tuesday nights. Her gold watch caught the flickering candlelight, and my carefully constructed composure shattered. I was 26, sitting across from a woman who had known my bedtime routine when I was 12. My hands were shaking beneath the table, gripping the napkin like a lifeline. My life, up until the accidental, terrifying beauty of Eleanor across the table, was a masterpiece of beige predictability. I worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized marketing firm in Seattle. The job was good, challenging enough to keep me engaged, repetitive enough that I didn't have to carry my stress home. I lived in a small, well-kept apartment on Capitol Hill, the kind of place where the silence at 7 p.m. felt less like peace and more like absence. I'd spent my entire adult life prioritizing stability and minimizing risk. Losing my mother young had instilled in me a deep, almost religious need for things to stay exactly where I left them. My evenings were dedicated to predictable routines, preparing a sensible dinner, usually pasta or a complex salad, watching an hour of a documentary, and reading until my eyes blurred. Dates were rare, usually arranged by well-meaning friends like Liam, and they rarely progressed beyond a second cup of coffee. I didn't chase fireworks. I was content with the dim, steady glow of a nightlight. I had adapted so thoroughly to the rhythm of being alone that I often forgot I wasn't supposed to be. The few times I tried to articulate this feeling of quiet aloneness to Liam, he'd called it my emotional invisibility cloak. He meant it affectionately, but the term resonated. I was a person who observed rather than participated, someone who always felt safely positioned at the edge of the frame. I was Sarah, the responsible daughter, the reliable colleague, the calm friend. Never Sarah, the magnetic center of attention. When Liam first texted me about Eleanor, I almost canceled. She's a lawyer, Sarah. She's smart, independent, funny, give it a shot. I agreed because it was less effort than arguing with Liam. I chose the outfit that was stylish but comfortable, the kind of dress that said, I made an effort, but I don't need this to work. I was performing the role of the willing date, fully expecting the predictable end. Polite conversation, a firm handshake, and the mutual understanding that we were not each other's person. I arrived precisely on time at the Italian bistro, La Luna, a place I'd walked past 1,000 times but never entered. The lighting was low, the air smelled of basil and expensive red wine. I sat down, ordered sparkling water, and pulled out my phone, mentally preparing for the usual small talk, career goals, travel plans, the weather. I didn't look up until a voice, familiar and deep, said, Sarah, you must be Liam's friend. I had prepared for a stranger. I had prepared for dullness. I had not prepared for the subtle scent of expensive wood smoke and vanilla that always clung to Eleanor when she visited my father. And I definitely hadn't prepared for the way she looked at me, not with the polite curiosity of a blind date, but with the quiet, unsettling knowingness of someone who had watched me grow up. The beige predictability of my life had just been violently splashed with color, and I didn't know if I could breathe. The entire reason I was sitting in La Luna was because of a broken washing machine. Seriously. Last Friday, my old temperamental machine finally gave out, flooding a corner of my laundry room. I called my father, Robert, mostly out of habit, knowing he was good with repairs. He came over immediately, bringing Eleanor. This was the crux of the problem. Over the past 5 years, Eleanor had transitioned from being a professional acquaintance of Dad's, they met through his architectural firm's legal dealings, to becoming a fixture in his small, controlled world. She was the friend who dropped off soup when he had the flu, the person he watched old movies with, the one who kept him company now that I was fully grown and focused on my own life. When they arrived at my apartment, I was frazzled, surrounded by damp towels. Eleanor, in a crisp suit and smelling faintly of that sophisticated perfume, took charge instantly. She didn't condescend. She just organized. She called a repairman, handled the initial insurance claim with 2 quick phone calls, and even helped me mop up the worst of the water, her tailored trousers slightly damp. Liam happened to call right then, checking in about a work project. He heard the chaos in my voice and insisted on coming over. When he arrived, Eleanor was laughing at something my dad had said about plumbing nightmares. Liam, who was usually meticulous about keeping his social circles separate, stood there, struck. "Who is this absolute powerhouse?" he had whispered to me later, once Eleanor and Dad had left. I explained that she was a friend of my father's, Eleanor Vance, a formidable corporate lawyer. Liam, ever the matchmaker, had immediately clocked her professional success and kind demeanor. He didn't register the decade-plus age gap or the complex proximity to my family life. To Liam, she was just an unattached, amazing woman, and I was his unattached, amazing friend. "I'm setting you up," he declared, not asking. I had tried to argue. "Liam, she knows my dad. That's weird." "So what? She's friends with your dad, not your mom. You're adults, Sarah. She's single. You're single. You'll have things in common. You both know Robert. That's a built-in conversation starter," I conceded, not out of enthusiasm, but out of exhaustion from the whole washing machine saga and my inability to generate a compelling reason why a blind date was a terrible idea. I thought I could go, be polite, confirm the lack of chemistry, and move on. It was supposed to be a transactional kindness to Liam, a coincidence of a broken appliance leading to a badly planned introduction. No destiny, just logistics. Now, sitting here, watching the candlelight illuminate the gentle lines around Eleanor's eyes, lines I'd noticed during Father's Day lunches, lines I'd never consciously studied, I realized the true horror of the situation. This wasn't just a date that felt wrong. This was the accidental insertion of forbidden proximity into the quiet, separate compartments of my organized life. Eleanor Vance was exactly the kind of person who seemed to belong only in pristine office towers and exclusive boardrooms. She wasn't masculine in her power. She was simply controlled. Everything about her, from her sharp, shoulder-length blonde bob to the precise cut of her navy dress, spoke of deliberate choices and high stakes. She moved through the world with the kind of effortless authority that I, a mid-level analyst, had only observed from a distance. She was 42, 16 years older than me. But the age gap wasn't what felt monumental. It was the chasm of experience and professional stature. In my father's house, she was simply Eleanor, the friendly guest who debated old films with him and occasionally brought over artisanal bread. In the context of this blind date, however, she transformed back into the formidable presence that commanded respect. She was the taboo not because she was inherently dangerous, but because her status relative to my family made any romantic interest feel like a betrayal of boundaries. She wasn't my age. She was my father's peer. "So, Liam didn't tell you who I was, did he?" Eleanor asked, a wry smile playing on her lips, her eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and something unsettlingly direct. She had recognized me immediately, of course. She knew I was Robert's daughter. I managed a strained laugh. "He described you as a corporate shark with a heart of gold. He left out the part where you've seen me in my college sweatpants during Christmas." "I knew it was you the moment you walked in, Sarah," she admitted, leaning back slightly, allowing the waiter to pour her a glass of Merlot. Her hands were composed, resting lightly on the white tablecloth, but her eyes were incredibly focused on mine. I should have called Liam and warned him, but I thought maybe this was just a weird coincidence we could laugh about later. I couldn't laugh. I was too busy cataloging her subtle details. The way she held her wine glass, firmly but elegantly. the slight furrow between her brows when she concentrated, the way her voice lowered when discussing anything personal. She wasn't just my father's friend. She was someone who saw the world through a lens of profound competence. She didn't belong in my world of quiet evenings and predictable data streams. She belonged in a world where things were fought for, won, and managed. I felt like an amateur sitting across from a seasoned professional, even though we were technically equals in the dating scene. The entire environment, the intimacy of the candlelight, the scent of her perfume, felt too charged, too close for a relationship that was supposed to be purely platonic, purely filial. This wasn't supposed to be an asymmetrical power dynamic in dating. Yet, here I was, mentally bowing to her effortless grace and control. The simple fact that she knew my father, knew my home, knew the history that made me, gave her an intrinsic, unearned advantage. And the worst part? My heart wasn't beating like I was facing a corporate lawyer. It was beating like I was facing an impossible, irresistible risk. "We could just leave," I suggested, my voice tight. "Call Liam. Tell him the universe clearly tried to play a joke and go home. No harm done." Eleanor didn't move. She took a slow sip of her wine, her gaze steady. It wasn't accusatory or challenging, but patient, the way a seasoned negotiator waits for a client to crack. That waiting, that stillness, unnerved me more than any grand gesture could have. "And miss out on an excellent bowl of pasta," she countered, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "We're already here, Sarah. We know each other, albeit through an incredibly complex, tangential context. Let's just talk, as people who know the same person and happen to be sitting across from each other." She made it sound so simple, so civilized, but the air between us was thick with the awareness of everything unsaid. We talked about my father briefly, his recent trip, the progress on my old washing machine, and the conversation felt safe, almost professional. We were establishing common ground, setting the boundaries back to where they belonged, acquaintance territory. But then, the waiter brought the menus, and the moment shifted. As I studied the list of appetizers, I felt Eleanor's gaze settle on me again. It wasn't the polite skim of a blind date checking out the physical package. It was an intense, deliberate observation. When I finally looked up, she didn't avert her eyes. "You look tired, Sarah," she said, the comment completely out of place. It wasn't an insult. It was an assessment, delivered with a strange softness. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Just a long week," I mumbled, annoyed that she could see past my carefully applied makeup and my professional veneer. "You analyze data for a living, right?" She continued, ignoring my dismissal. "Do you ever get tired of finding patterns in other people's chaos instead of creating your own?" The question hit me with surprising force. It went directly to the core of my emotional invisibility, the deliberate safety I had built around my life. How could she, a woman who only saw me at family gatherings or during brief, chaotic repairs, know that I felt like I was perpetually documenting life, rather than living it? My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this a trick? Was she being manipulative? Or was I just projecting my own insecurities onto her neutral observation? "She's just being kind, Sarah. She's your dad's friend. Stop overanalyzing the woman who watched you graduate college." But the look in her eyes lingered, a deep, searching blue that held a hint of loneliness I hadn't expected from someone so outwardly successful. That look lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. It was long enough to break the professional distance, long enough for me to feel a sudden, unexpected spark of recognition that had nothing to do with my father. I felt the dangerous, uncomfortable pull of wanting to answer her honestly, to tell her everything, to confess that my organized life felt utterly empty. The tension was suffocating, suspended between the realization of who she was and the terrifying possibility of who she might become. I tried to pivot the conversation back to work, asking her about a recent high-profile case I'd read about in the legal journals. I was trying to rebuild the wall of professional distance, reminding us both of the formidable gap between us. She answered eloquently, describing the brutal hours and the intellectual sparring. She was exactly the corporate shark Liam had promised. Then, she paused, pushing her plate away, though she'd barely touched her pasta. The lighting made the shadows under her eyes more pronounced. Her composure didn't crack, but the steel underneath it seemed momentarily softened. "That case took 6 months of my life," she said, her voice dropping to a low, weary register. "I won, of course. We always win. But when it was over, I drove home at 2 a.m. and realized I hadn't spoken to anyone about anything besides contracts and depositions for nearly a week. I had the victory, the headline, the bonus, and an empty apartment." She didn't dramatize it. It was a factual statement, delivered with the blunt honesty of someone who had long since stopped trying to impress anyone. This wasn't the powerful lawyer seeking validation. This was a woman confessing to profound isolation. "I imagine your father tells you the same thing," she continued, managing a tired smile. "The higher you climb, the harder it is to find someone who doesn't want something from you, or who isn't intimidated by the view from the top." I realized then that her frequent platonic visits to my father weren't just about friendship. They were about finding refuge. Robert was safe. He was a peer, but one whose life was settled, who didn't threaten her professional space, and who offered simple, uncomplicated companionship. Eleanor Vance, the successful lawyer, was simply lonely. The inversion of power was sudden and profound. Socially, financially, and professionally, she held all the cards. But in that moment, she was emotionally exposed, vulnerable in a way I had never allowed myself to be. My own loneliness felt small and contained compared to the expansive emptiness she described. She was revealing a wound, not asking me to heal it, but simply acknowledging its existence to another person who understood solitude. I shifted in my seat, the air feeling less like a blind date and more like a quiet confidence. "My life is designed around avoiding that emptiness," I confessed, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I keep everything predictable, small. I thought if nothing exciting ever happened, then nothing truly bad ever could." She looked at me then, truly saw me, nodding slowly. "That's a defense mechanism, Sarah. A well-constructed fortress. But fortresses keep things out, and eventually, they keep the resident trapped inside." In that moment, the awkwardness dissolved. The friend of my father boundary became less important than the shared recognition of what it meant to live a life that looked full on the outside, but felt hollow on the inside. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the successful lawyer. She was just Eleanor, tired and honest, across the table from Sarah, who was equally tired of hiding. We never actually ate the pasta. After that raw exchange about solitude and fortresses, the formal structure of the date collapsed, and something softer took its place. We ordered coffee, Eleanor taking hers black, me with too much cream, and settled into a conversation that felt less like an interview and more like a long, shared breath. We talked for over an hour, discussing books we loved, the ridiculous pressure of being perpetually busy, and the small, unnoticed details of city life we both appreciated. I realized, startlingly, that I was talking to her with a level of unguarded honesty I hadn't used with anyone in years, not even Liam. She listened differently. When I spoke, she didn't interrupt or formulate her response. She simply absorbed the words, her gaze steady and intent. At one point, I was describing a weird habit I had of alphabetizing my spice rack when stressed, and she laughed. That same rich, husky sound from the beginning of the night, only now it was directed solely at me, in shared amusement. When she laughed, she reached a hand up and briefly pushed a stray piece of hair behind her ear. It was a fleeting, completely natural gesture, but it held my attention, reminding me of her physical presence. The tension wasn't gone, but it had morphed into something warm and grounding. We weren't flirting in the conventional sense. There were no exaggerated compliments or suggestive comments. The connection was purely in the rhythm of our conversation, the comfortable silence that fell when we both contemplated a shared thought. It was the intimacy of understanding, not the intimacy of desire. "You know," Eleanor said, swirling the dark coffee in her cup, "when I first met Robert, he talked about you constantly. He was so proud. He always described you as my Sarah, the quiet observer. I always imagined you as this serious, almost severe young woman. You're not severe at all." "I try to be," I admitted softly. "It's safer." "It is safer," she agreed, her voice gentle. "But you miss a lot of life outside the perimeter." When the waiter brought the check, Eleanor didn't make a move to grab it, nor did she assume I would. She simply placed her hand on the edge of the table, near mine, waiting for me to decide how we should handle the financial transaction of this non-date. Our fingers were about an inch apart, and for the first time that night, I consciously didn't move away. I felt the heat radiating from her skin, a tiny charged current of proximity. We paid silently, splitting the bill down the middle with the same mutual respect that had defined the past hour. There were no declarations, no promises of a future, no mention of the obvious complication of my father. There was only the simple, terrifying truth. I liked being with her, and she liked being with me. The world had shifted, but the boundaries remained, silent, waiting, and now, undeniably challenged. We stood outside the bistro on the cool Seattle pavement. The traffic was thin, and the city hummed a muted end-of-evening song. My car was parked 2 blocks away. Eleanor's driver, a quiet man named Thomas, was waiting further up the street, a dark sedan glowing under the streetlight. This was the moment of decision. I needed to perform the required social ritual. Thank her, say it was nice to catch up, and retreat back into my fortress, pretending the last 2 hours were merely a strange blip in the algorithm of my life. I opened my mouth to say goodbye, but the words caught in my throat. I looked at Eleanor, and the practical implications of what was happening, or what could happen, slammed into me with the weight of reality. This was Eleanor Vance, my father's friend. My father, who had relied on her friendship, who had introduced her to me not as a romantic possibility, but as a stable, respected peer. If I pursued this, if I allowed myself to feel the undeniable, quiet attraction that was now humming beneath my skin, what would happen to that relationship? Robert was a simple, good man. He was proud of his friendships. The idea of causing him discomfort, of introducing drama or potential heartbreak into his stable life, felt unbearable. I can't do this. This is too much chaos. This is not worth the risk. Thank you for being so honest, I said, forcing my voice to sound casual and friendly. I really enjoyed the conversation. Tell my dad I said hi. It was a deliberate attempt to put her back in her box, the context of my father. I was trying to rebuild the walls right there on the sidewalk, brick by emotional brick. I needed her to understand that the connection we'd just shared was an isolated incident, a fluke, something to be archived and forgotten. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch at the reference to my dad, but she didn't mirror my attempt at distance either. She just observed me, seeming to recognize the fear behind my abrupt social closure. "You're retreating, Sarah," she stated gently, her voice devoid of judgment, but filled with absolute clarity. My chest tightened. "I'm being realistic," I corrected, trying to inject some steel into my tone. "This is complicated. You're my father's friend. You're an important part of his life. I value that, and I don't want to mess it up over a strange coincidence arranged by Liam." I felt the immense weight of the social expectations, the age, the professional distance, the filial loyalty. If this ended badly, I risked losing not just a potential partner, but disrupting the peaceful, established rhythm of my father's life. The fear of that ripple effect was potent enough to make me want to run back to the safety of my alphabetized spice rack. I needed her to tell me she understood, that she thought it was a bad idea too, so I could leave with my conscience intact. I needed her to validate my fear, so I wouldn't have to confront my desire. Eleanor took one step closer, closing the small, safe gap I had tried to maintain. The move was subtle, not aggressive, but it instantly changed the gravity of the space between us. She didn't touch me, but I could feel the residual warmth of the bistro radiating off her. The distant sound of her waiting car seemed irrelevant. She looked directly into my eyes, and the quiet intensity was back, deeper than before. She dismissed all my carefully constructed boundaries with a single, devastatingly honest statement. I know this is complicated, Sarah. I know the optics are terrible, and I know it risks Robert's comfort. I have spent the last 5 years observing the rule of proximity. I am Robert's friend, and you are Robert's daughter. That was the equation. It was safe, predictable, and clean. She paused, taking a deliberate breath. Her expression wasn't hopeful or pleading. It was resigned, yet resolute. But the truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you helped Robert reorganize his library last summer. I watched you sitting on the floor, surrounded by his old books, perfectly focused, completely unaware of how quietly beautiful you were in that moment. You weren't Robert's daughter then. You were just, you. The shock of her words hit me like a physical blow. The library incident. I remembered that day. I was wearing my grubbiest clothes, covered in dust, completely unconcerned with anything but chronological order. I had thought I was invisible. She hadn't just seen me. She had observed me, precisely the way I observed the world. She continued, her voice low, pulling me deeper into the gravity of the moment. You keep trying to make yourself small, Sarah. You try to blend in, to maintain the status quo. I saw that tonight when you tried to retreat. And honestly, it makes me incredibly sad. Because you are the quiet observer, yes. But you deserve to be the one observed too. You deserve to be seen for everything you are, even the things you hide. She reached out, very slowly, and brushed a single stray curl away from my cheek, the contact fleeting and light as a moth's wing. It wasn't a gesture of seduction. It was a gesture of profound recognition. I am not going to jeopardize my friendship with your father, she promised, her thumb lingering near my ear. But I also cannot pretend that the last 2 hours didn't happen, or that I didn't finally meet the woman I've been noticing from the periphery for years. I don't need a date, Sarah. I need what happened tonight. And if I am being honest, I think you do too. I see you, Sarah, completely. My eyes stung. No one, absolutely no one, had ever cut through my defenses so cleanly, so respectfully, and yet so devastatingly. This wasn't about power or status or age. This was about being chosen, truly seen, after years of standing on the edges. My breath hitched, a small, involuntary sound that was closer to a sob than a sigh. Her words, so simple yet so deep, had destabilized everything I thought I knew about myself and my place in the world. I wasn't just Sarah the invisible analyst anymore. I was Sarah, seen by Eleanor. I'm terrified, I whispered, the admission tasting metallic and strange on my tongue. I didn't try to hide the tremor in my hands. The sophisticated dress I was wearing suddenly felt flimsy, inadequate protection against the sudden vulnerability. I know, Eleanor murmured, her hand dropping back to her side, respecting the space but maintaining the tension. But what are you terrified of, Sarah? The chaos, or the possibility of something real? I looked away for a moment, down at the polished sidewalk, watching the reflection of the streetlights distort in the residual moisture from the earlier rain. I was afraid of the chaos, yes. I was afraid of hurting my father, of judgment, of the inevitable complications. But mostly, I was afraid that if I let myself feel this much, this quickly, and it ended, the emptiness I had tried so hard to contain would consume me entirely. I turned back to face her, meeting her steady blue eyes. I didn't have any grand romantic words. I didn't suddenly transform into a brave heroine. I was just a woman on a street corner, finally admitting the truth. I don't know how to do this without ruining something, I confessed. I'm not good at risk. My whole life is structured around safety. A faint, tender expression crossed Eleanor's face, a look of profound understanding. Then we will go slowly. We will structure the risk, Sarah. We will navigate the safety protocols. But you cannot tell me that what happened tonight, the connection, the honesty, that this isn't worth at least acknowledging. She didn't demand an answer, didn't press for a promise. She simply waited, giving me the silence to make the choice, fully aware of the stakes. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the fear wash over me, and then letting it pass. I was tired of being safe. I was tired of being invisible. "Don't tell Liam," I said, a faint, almost shaky smile touching my lips. "And don't tell my dad, and I don't know what we're doing, Eleanor. I truly don't." Her response was simple, definitive, and exactly what I needed to hear. "That's fine, Sarah. We're doing something true, and that is always enough to start." Eleanor didn't move towards her waiting car. Instead, she asked, "Which way is your car parked?" I pointed down the street, towards the dim glow of my small sedan. "Walk with me," she suggested. "It's cold out here." And so we walked. It wasn't the brisk, purposeful walk of two people ending a bad date, nor was it the intertwined, intimate stroll of established lovers. It was a shared trajectory, two people moving forward side by side, carefully navigating the space between them. We didn't talk about my father or the complexity of our sudden connection. Instead, she asked me about the data analysis work I found most rewarding, the small moments of discovery that broke through the routine. I talked about finding a completely unexpected anomaly in consumer behavior that changed an entire marketing strategy. She listened, occasionally interrupting with a sharp, insightful question that showed she wasn't just being polite. She was genuinely interested in the mechanics of my mind. The focus was on the intellectual connection, the shared appreciation for structure and subtle discovery, even as our hands brushed slightly as we rounded a corner. When we reached my car, the small, predictable metal box that represented my safe, quiet life, the moment felt different from the one at the bistro exit. There was no longer a need to rush, no need to establish boundaries. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor said, stopping at my driver's side door. "For staying. For being honest." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the night air. "For seeing me." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes fixed on mine. There was a challenge there, a daring proposition that didn't require words. I knew if I stayed, if I leaned in, this fragile, terrifying honesty would accelerate into something physical. But she didn't push. She simply let the moment hang, a silent promise. "Good night," she finally said, her voice dropping to that husky, familiar register. "Good night, Eleanor." I watched as she turned and walked back toward her waiting sedan, the powerful lawyer silhouette disappearing into the city shadows. I waited until the taillights of her car vanished before I got into mine. The drive home was a blur. The silence of my apartment felt less like absence and more like anticipation. I didn't alphabetize my spice rack that night. I just sat on the couch, the memory of her intense gaze burning away the last vestiges of my emotional invisibility cloak. My life wasn't predictable anymore. It was complicated, risky, and impossibly, beautifully true. And I had just chosen to walk right into the potential storm. If you've ever felt like you're safe, predictable world was suddenly turned upside down by an unexpected connection. Especially one that breaks all the rules, hit the like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you risk everything for a connection that truly sees you, even if it meant upsetting the most important people in your life? Let me know, and come back next week for the story of how Eleanor explained the blind date to my father.